You are standing at a crossroad between two of the most powerful criminal empires the modern world has ever produced, and only one road leads out alive. On one side sits an organization so deeply embedded in American city life that for decades it was practically invisible, running everything from the shadows. On the other side stands an empire that grew so fast and accumulated so much wealth it began to outspend and outgun entire national governments. By the end of this, you have to answer one question honestly. Which of these two worlds would you actually survive long enough to walk away from? To understand the Mafia, you have to go back to Sicily, where distrust of outside authority was not a philosophy, but a survival strategy passed down through generations. The original Sicilian tradition was built on the idea that loyalty to your own people mattered more than any law a distant government could write. When Sicilian and southern Italian immigrants arrived in American cities in the late 1800s, they brought that tradition with them, like luggage they never unpacked. Then Prohibition arrived in 1920 and handed the early American Mafia something no government intended to give it: an enormous, ready-made, illegal market worth a fortune. In the span of roughly a decade, the Mafia went from a neighborhood protection racket to a sophisticated criminal organization operating across multiple American cities simultaneously. The cartels had a completely different origin story. They were born not out of cultural tradition, but out of raw geography, poverty, and the enormous appetite of a wealthy neighbor. The trafficking routes that would become cartel highways already existed long before any single organization controlled them, carved out by smugglers moving whatever the market demanded. What changed in the late 1970s and through the 1980s was scale. The demand coming from North America was so massive, it transformed regional smugglers into industrial-scale criminal enterprises. Unlike the Mafia's slow, decades-long build, some cartels went from small regional operations to billion-dollar transnational organizations in under 10 years. Both empires were ultimately powered by the same fundamental engine. People wanted something that was illegal, and these organizations were willing to provide it at any cost. Now you need to understand how each of these worlds was actually organized, because structure is what determines whether someone like you survives or disappears. The American Mafia built itself on one of the most rigid and clearly defined organizational hierarchies that any criminal enterprise in history has ever operated under. At the top sat the boss, beneath him, the underboss, beside him, the consigliere as advisor, below them, the capos, and at the bottom, the soldiers who did the actual work. To become a full member, a made man, you had to be of Italian heritage, you had to be formally sponsored, and you had to go through a secret initiation ritual with genuine weight to it. Being made meant you were protected by the rules of the organization itself, which sounds reassuring until you understand that those same rules could also get you killed. The cartels built something architecturally almost opposite: a loose, fast-moving network of cells designed to keep operating even when leadership was arrested, killed, or replaced. A cartel cell could lose its leader and continue functioning because no single person held all the knowledge. Information was deliberately fragmented and distributed across the network. Where the Mafia prized hierarchy and protocol, the cartel prized speed, adaptability, and the ability to reroute around any obstacle that law enforcement or rivals placed in its path. The Mafia structure gave you clarity about who you answered to and what the rules were. The cartel structure gave you flexibility, but almost no guaranteed safety net. So you have seen where they came from and how they were built. And in part, you're going to find out what daily life inside each of these worlds actually cost. You are about to compare two criminal empires built on entirely different foundations, and only one model would have kept you alive. The Mafia did not sell you anything. It simply charged you for the right to exist and operate inside its city. Every business owner, every contractor, every market stall on the right street paid a quiet, regular tribute with no invoice and no receipt. The protection racket was elegant in its logic. You were being protected from the very organization collecting the payment. Gambling and loan sharking turned the Mafia into a bank that charged interest you could never quite negotiate your way out of. Union influence was the Mafia's masterstroke. It gave them a hand inside legitimate industry without ever appearing on a payroll. Taken together, the Mafia's model was a quiet tax on an entire city, steady and nearly invisible to outsiders looking in. The cartel, by contrast, was not taxing a city. It was running a global supply chain from soil to street corner across multiple borders. Production began in remote mountain regions, where entire agricultural economies were quietly reorganized around a single high-value crop. From there, the cartel managed transport logistics that would have impressed a Fortune 500 shipping company, minus the paperwork. Moving product across an international border required corrupted officials, fake cargo manifests, tunnels, aircraft, and an army of unknowing couriers. At its peak, a single major cartel was generating revenues that put it in the same conversation as the GDP of a small nation. When you generate that kind of cash, your enemy is no longer just law enforcement. It is the physical problem of the money itself. Cartels at their height reportedly had so much cash in storage that moisture was destroying bundles before anyone could count them. Laundering that volume required real estate, front businesses, currency exchanges, and compliant financial institutions on multiple continents. The Mafia moved far less money in raw terms, but it moved it through deeply embedded local institutions that were almost impossible to untangle. Smaller and steadier meant the Mafia's income could survive a bad year, a federal indictment, or even the imprisonment of its boss. Now consider loyalty, because in both worlds, loyalty was not a virtue, but a survival mechanism enforced from the moment you were brought in. The Mafia's initiation was a blood oath and a ceremony. Once you were made, you were bound by omerta, the code of silence, for life. Omerta was not just tradition, it was the operating system of the entire organization, and breaking it was treated as a form of treason. Men who cooperated with the government and entered witness protection were considered dead to the organization long before they actually died. The cartel's loyalty was a different animal. It ran on money first and fear second, and that ordering made it fundamentally more brittle. When a cartel rival offered more money or a government offered a deal, the ideology holding the organization together could evaporate very quickly. Both worlds punished betrayal severely, but the Mafia made silence a matter of identity, while the cartel made it a matter of survival calculus. You start to notice that the Mafia had one golden rule above everything else: never make the front page. Staying invisible was the strategy, so you would have found the Mafia bribing officials, cutting deals, and dissolving problems before they ever became public. The cartel took the opposite lesson from power and decided that being seen, being feared, and being loud was its own kind of protection. Where the Mafia whispered a threat once, the cartel made sure entire towns received the message without anyone needing to say a word. The brutal honesty is that confronting the state openly, as the cartel did, accelerated every clock that was already ticking against it. The Mafia preferred to own a piece of the state quietly, which bought decades of relative stability that the cartel's overt footing never could. You would think the Mafia's caution made it untouchable, but it turned out the law only needed one patient strategy to unravel the whole thing. Racketeering laws rewrote the rules of the game, letting prosecutors treat the entire organization as a single criminal enterprise for the very first time. Then the informants came, and men who had spent lifetimes swearing silence walked into courtrooms and started talking. And the Mafia never fully recovered. You watch one boss after another get led away, and the Mafia's great strength, its tight hierarchy, became the very thing that made it so easy to prosecute. The cartel fell differently, not through courtroom testimony, but through raids, extraditions, and the relentless hunting of each individual at the top. Here is what made the cartel uniquely resilient, though. Removing the leader barely slowed the machine, because the organization had already learned to run without one. The Mafia needed its men to stay loyal and quiet. The cartel only needed its structure to survive, and structure is far harder to arrest than a person. So you were left with this honest picture. The Mafia broke from the inside out, while the cartel was hunted from the outside in, and both ended the same way. Now comes the verdict you have been waiting for, and it is not the one either world would want you to walk away with. The Mafia offered you structure, ritual, and a slower descent, a life that could feel almost ordinary right up until it suddenly and completely was not. The cartel offered speed, reach, and scale, a violent descent that burned bright and brief, with almost no version of the story ending anywhere but a cell or a grave. What both worlds shared is that the state outlasted them, not because the state was always smarter, but because it could simply afford to wait longer than any man could. Every name at the top of both organizations either died in the role or finished the story staring at a cell wall. And that is not a coincidence. That is the pattern. So when you ask yourself which world you would survive, the only genuinely honest answer is that you would not survive either, and neither did the men who built them. These were two different roads to the same destination, and the most important thing history taught us about both is that the destination was never worth the journey. If that got you thinking, hit subscribe so you never miss the next comparison, and drop your verdict in the comments because we genuinely want to hear it.